Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. Welcome back to iRacing, and welcome to the Season 2 update for iRacing, the centerpiece of which, in my opinion at very least, is this. Yes, this is the Dallara IR18, and we've seen this before. It has been the IndyCar for the last 2 years running. However, look at what we've got going on top of this thing. Yes, Aeroscreen has finally come to sim racing, courtesy of the absolutely wonderful developers who are always trying to put more finishing touches and enhancements and improvements into the absolutely great iRacing sim. New to IndyCar for what was supposed to be the 2020 IndyCar season is Aeroscreen. And this, in the same vein as systems like Halo in other series, this is designed to increase cockpit protection, particularly in the area of the driver's head. IndyCar in particular is at particular risk to driver head injuries due to debris incursion into the cockpit. It's very tight racing for the most part in IndyCar, and of course because they do run on ovals, these guys are in close quarters at incredibly high speeds, so when accidents occur, the cars tend to fly to pieces and debris goes wherever Isaac Newton says it's going to go. Unfortunately, in years gone by, that has included into the vicinity of the driver's head in the cockpit. Notable incidents where we had serious injury or, unfortunately, deaths of drivers due to debris or other sort of foreign body incursion into the cockpit include names like Dan Weldon, Las Vegas in 2011. Justin Wilson, Pocono in 2015, where an absolute freak accident, a nose cone off of another car hit him in the head as he was driving along there at Pocono. Obviously, Robert Wickens didn't involve cockpit incursion, but a very serious accident going up into the catch fence, also at Pocono. And unfortunately, I happened to be there on the day to see that accident. It was not something fun to watch, and it's good to see that Robert Wickens is still on the mend, but unfortunately, nowhere near to the level that he once was, physically speaking. But he's coming back, let's hope so. But regardless, IndyCar, probably more than any other open-wheel discipline, has a need for a cockpit protection device like this. Initially, everybody was looking at the Formula One concept of Halo in its initial iterations and other alternative measures that were initially trialed alongside Halo. And ultimately, Formula One and other open-wheel series run directly by the FIA went in the direction of Halo. And IndyCar also took a look at Halo. Unfortunately, due to the nature of IndyCar racing, the venues that they visit, particularly ovals with banked corners, Halo doesn't work because the driver's sight lines involve looking up and out of the cockpit quite often to see where you're going, first of all, on a cambered corner, as well as to see other cars out there ahead and alongside at rather oblique angles to the driver in terms of where his eyes are looking. So Halo, with that very thick crossbar across that hoop section, is not going to work for IndyCar. So the developers and the engineers who run and consult with the IndyCar series went to the drawing board, and they came up with a couple different prototypes of an Aeroscreen solution, is what they eventually called this device. Initially, we saw Scott Dixon testing this device at Phoenix a couple of years ago. It was a much different-looking device than what we have here on the car now in 2020. It did have a transparent plexiglass paddle, but it didn't really have too much structural rigidity. Just like Halo, one of the design criteria for this device is it must be able to deflect a wheel and tire assembly at considerable speed. For Halo, that speed was 225 kilometers per hour. For IndyCar, I'm not entirely sure what the specific specification was, but it was a higher speed than that. So that Aeroscreen concept, without so much of a rigid structure behind it, a fixed structure, unfortunately it wasn't robust enough to accomplish that goal. So ultimately what they've decided on is this hybrid solution, which effectively involves a Halo-type structure, as you see in Formula One, behind a plexiglass outer skin, which does completely enclose the cockpit. So, unlike the Halo solution, this is actually a closed cockpit, for want of a better term. No, the top is still open, and that's how the driver will do ingress and egress. However, the front and sides are all enclosed by that transparent plexiglass, and then it is bolstered underneath with an actual Halo structure, very close in specification to what you see in Formula One. So this is a rigid, permanent structure mounted on top of the car. It is structurally integral to the monocoque, not in terms of the monocoque's actual structural integrity, but as a a complete unit, it is also a roll structure. It is a support structure. It does have the robustness necessary to deflect large objects that get into the vicinity of the cockpit. It also, as far as we're led to believe, has that structural rigidity to be able to resist perforation, deformation, or outright removal from the car due to very, very massive objects impacting it. So fence posts, for example, as was unfortunately the case for Dan Weldon. This solution is something that IndyCar needed. I do have to say it is not at all elegant looking. I think it is very aesthetically challenged. I think it completely ruins the visual proportions of what was a very pretty race car in the IR18. But unlike the detractors that we see with regard to the Formula One halo, and myself included on that list, IndyCar absolutely had a need for this, and they have instituted it with transparency, with all of the teams involved, with the fans as well being kept in the loop over the last couple of years. So this is the solution that they've arrived at for the 2020 season, if we ever see a 2020 season at this point. But here it is. When IndyCar gets a new chassis for 2022 or 2023 perhaps at this point, this solution will remain on the car, but I have to believe working with Dallara from the ground up, integrating this concept in with a new chassis is going to look a lot better as well. The whole car will be a much more visually and structurally cohesive package. As it stands right now, this thing is an afterthought on top of what's really the DW12 chassis from 2012. So we've got an 8-year-old chassis with a brand new device on top of it. They were not designed to mesh with each other from the outset. So it is what it is for the moment. So it looks a bit visually obtuse. Anyway, though, because this is the first chance that any of us have had to drive this thing in sim racing, what's it like? When Halo came into Formula One for the start of the 2018 season, we took a look at what it was going to be like to be driving a Halo car. And initially we did that in Assetto Corsa with the Ferrari SF70H, which had an approximation of the Halo retrofitted on top of it. It was a little bit jarring from a driving standpoint in terms of the way that it changes your sightlines. Not by much, all things considered, and I was actually rather surprised at just how quickly I adapted to it. After a couple of laps, my brain just deleted it from my field of view, and to this day, I really don't notice it all that much any longer. This thing, though, yes, we do have the same general structure that we get in Halo, but we have the added dimension of having this being an enclosed structure. There's an actual windscreen on this thing, so we no longer have really an open cockpit. We have an open top section, but we can't really see that anyway when we're in the car. So for all intents and purposes, this is now approaching the same sort of eye points in terms of the way that you're using your eyes and where you're looking to an LMP1, LMP2 car with a closed cockpit. So different dynamics indeed. However, what do we get from inside the cockpit? Here is what we get from inside the cockpit. You can see that the general cockpit layout and everything is exactly the same as it had been in the IR18 because, well, this still is the IR18, but it is no longer an open cockpit car. You can see that we've got reflections going on across both sides. You can see that central strut, that main structural pillar that's linking this device up with the front of the chassis, and it's actually mounting to the same location that the Advanced Frontal Protection Device, the AFP vane that IndyCar put on the cars midway through 2019. Same place where that device was, so that hasn't changed all that much in terms of the sightlines, but now you can just see the impact of having that enclosed plexiglass around the cockpit. We have reflections now starting to enter our field of view, and this is a very strange thing driving an open-wheeled car because you normally don't get reflections like that. Again, it's very reminiscent of an LMP1, LMP2 sort of view right now. However, what do we have going on visually? We're at Road America here. This is a place that IndyCar visits. However, it is a very long and it's a very undulating natural topography racetrack. We have lots of dips and crests and rises and falls and long corners and tight corners and all kinds of blind entrances and blind apices. So if we're going to get any visual challenges with this new device on the car, it's going to be at places like these. Maybe not so much on the ovals because the elevation change really isn't there on ovals. Yes, you do get it through those cambered long corners, but at the same time, you're not going to be going up and down hills and things like that on an oval. So this really is where I feel that we're going to get any real problems if they do exist with this device. So let's get the car fired up and just do some ciders here. And immediately the first thing that comes to mind here as we come across here is have a look at front and center just below the top of the monocoque here. You can see those two raised gray black sections immediately behind the steering wheel. What those are actually ducts that come from the front of the chassis from just underneath where the Aeroscreen and the front of the chassis meet each other. That's for driver cooling. They're just sending some air, almost a ram air effect, into the cockpit area just to keep cockpit temperatures down a little bit. Because in testing, the drivers did say that it got mighty hot in these things, and the airflow that normally you would get with just having an open cockpit doesn't really exist anymore. So that's a little bit of a band-aid solution to get some air into the cockpits. Some of the drivers also running helmets with the cooling hoses on top of them, very much like NASCAR drivers use, because those cars obviously are closed cockpit and always have been. So some interesting times here, some interesting solutions for cockpit cooling. Unfortunately, you can also see the implications that has upon our field of view coming out of the cockpit. I cannot see anything that's directly in front anymore. And it has nothing to do with that central pillar. That's basically the same as it is on a Halo-equipped car. That I'm okay with. It's the sight lines that I have coming across the top of the monocoque there. That's new. That's different. See right here coming into the shadow, you can see the reflections as they're flickering, going through the shadows. That's also very new. Again, this is an open cockpit car, or at least that's what my brain still registers this car as, and it is no longer. It's very, very different. See even reflections from the bolts that are holding that central stay in place now. Very different. All kinds of different things entering your field of view. We turn the engine up. We'll start to build up some speed. Now we've got a lot of fuel on board. Trying to see what it is. Coming down the front straight here, I cannot see anything that's right in front of me. I'm having to look so far ahead and just really using my circuit knowledge here to project in my mind's eye where I think the car is about to end up, and I cannot directly see what's in front of me. I've got to look so far out. And here coming uphill, I'm looking to the sides of the road more so than I'm looking to the front, because again, there's just nothing there to see. To the sides there to the left, now looking to the right for the brake boards. There's the two. We're going to get on our brakes. We turn in, track out. Coming uphill, steeply is okay for the most part because you can still see in front. But then as you get on top of a corner, like right there, that's a blind corner, blind on entrance. You're looking off to the side. You're not looking ahead anymore. Very different. The long right-hander that they call the carousel here at Road America. A little bit of understeer, no problem. Now through the kink, flat out, easy flat, no problem. The other thing that maybe some of you are wondering about is, can you feel this thing? Is there an aerodynamic difference? Is there a weight distribution difference? Because this is a rather appreciable structure in terms of mass. I believe it weighs about 35, 40 kilograms, so it's an appreciable thing. Not really noticing any real differences in chassis dynamics. Weight distribution on the car really doesn't feel any different. And if anything, aerodynamically, it appears that there may be slightly less drag, if you can believe it. I know this thing looks very clunky and just sort of stuck on top of the chassis, but it actually is acting a little bit as a flow modifier there just to keep the air obviously out of the cockpit, and that does generate some drag when you've got an open cockpit. This thing, yeah, feels a little bit more slippery at speed. And I'm sure on ovals we're going to see some raised straight line speeds. Indianapolis, pole position may well be about 240 miles an hour, maybe faster. But again, through here, it's all off to the side now in terms of where your eyes are. There are the brake boards. There's the two coming down. First gear, turn in, apex curbs on the power exit. Here, blind entrance to this corner. It takes so long before you can spot the apex curbs. I'm definitely a little bit afraid of the sides of the track now. I just can't quite sight the car in the same way that I could previously. It's definitely going to be an adjustment. Yeah, again, through the sweeper there, I couldn't really see the sides of the road toward the exit, and it's just making me hesitate a little bit. Some of that's going to be adaptation, and some of that may well be tweaking the field of view or tweaking the eye point here in terms of raising it or lowering it. .47.313. Yeah, I cannot see the apex curves there until we're right on top of them for the most part. In terms of what's directly in front of you, and of course this depends greatly on the topography that you're going through at any one time, but you can really only see about 1.5 seconds ahead, which I suppose is completely normal, but at the same time, right now, I can't see the road at all. It's not until we start heading downhill again, and by the time we head downhill through this corner, you better be braking. So it's a little bit of guesswork at this point. Through the kink, flat out, no problem. On the brakes. The first on the power, there we are. Definitely starting to get a handle on how I've got to be using my eyes now. And again, those of you who are on single screens like I am, obviously you're going to be doing things similar to this. Those of you who are using triples or VR or something of that sort, this video means nothing to you. I'm sure in VR that the problems I'm describing simply don't exist, really. But it's only right here that I feel that I could be sitting a little bit higher. I just cannot see down the road at all. And when you're at high speed like this is the fastest part of the racetrack, you really do need to be looking out ahead so you can plot where you want this car to end up. And of course, running in traffic, you want to see what's going on ahead of you. Has anybody gone off? Do you have flag signals to be looking at? Things like that. Most of that would be a complete mystery for me at this point. It takes forever to get back to full throttle through that corner. That out. All right, we used a little bit of exit curb there. Starting to find the boundaries of the circuit again. Just resetting my visual landmarks in terms of knowing where it's safe to run wide and where I've got to tuck it back in. It's just a completely different picture from the cockpit now. Down here, the front straight as well. Really just cannot see anything out ahead. Focusing on the left there for the cones. Already looked well through the apex and exit of this corner. Know exactly where the car wants to be. Under the bridge. Now, look to the right, look to the left. Don't look straight ahead because there's nothing to see. 5, 4, 3, 2, brakes. First gear. Apex, exit. Got on the power too soon. That's not the Aeroscreen's fault. Apex, exit, there we go. There's the side of the track. Still a little bit cautious there. Especially because that's the fastest corner on the track. You don't want to mess that up. Just trying to keep the white line there just over the edge of the cockpit on the left. Brakes and turn. Use the exit curbs a little bit too much. Got a 1x for that. First gear, there's the apex on the power exit. Under the bridge. Look to the right, look to the left. Wait for the kink. There it is. 3, 2, brakes. Bit of a lock up there. We're going to go a little wide, no problem. Brakes, first gear, turn in. Just a little bit of afraid of the left side there. And a little wide. More understeer settling in now as the tires wear in. Through the kink. Should still be flat, and it is easily. Go into the pits. Just limiter up. And in the pit lane. Let's see. Trying to get my pit screen up. There we go. Don't need to add any fuel. We won't do that. Windshield tear off. Now this will be interesting to watch. I don't really see any debris on here. Let's do the stop and see if we can see them tear anything off of that windscreen. There it is. Nope. Shut it down here though because I do want to play a little bit with some graphics adjustments in here. It does feel a little bit too low through, not really through any of the corners, but particularly down the long straights here, particularly the back straight. So what if we just raise our eye point a little bit? This is 0.0, so this is ultimate default, I think. I was actually running at minus 0.4, and obviously the lower you go, the less and less realistic this becomes. Yeah, you're not going to be looking at this anytime soon. But 1.2, does that seem a little high? Maybe, maybe not. It's a little bit hard to judge, but this may be usable as is. Up here, and I think any higher than this at the absolute extreme, I think is not going to be quite accurate. But, and then, you know, how high could we actually go? Yeah, you can see just how unrealistically huge you can be if you want to be. But there it is, and actually you can see that slot gap between the Aeroscreen and the monocoque, so that's interesting. Way that you could even use that to help you sight the car? Not really. If you're at plus 0.2, 0.4, yeah, let's just try this on for size. I think that might be okay, and I think we might even be able to go a little bit lower than that. Just see where it is. The other thing about this is because the cockpit is now enclosed in the real world, the driver doesn't have to be sitting as low as possible for an aerodynamic benefit any longer. So perhaps being able to sit a little bit higher is something that they could do. Of course, the higher you have the driver sitting, the less efficient the car is going to be dynamically with regard to center of gravity, but perhaps the visibility benefits outweigh the detriment of center of gravity. I don't know. Probably not. But it's possible. Now I can see all the way down the straight, no problem. We're going to go a lot faster on this next hot lap just because I can see better. Yep, I can now place the car exactly where I want it. There is no longer any guessing on my part. Tires are a little bit cold, but other than that, everything is exactly where I want it to be. And I don't know, perhaps this is the view that they'll get, because this seems absolutely fine now. This feels like almost exactly like Halo. You just have the reflections, which are different, but not really that big of a deal. In direct sunlight, maybe that would be. Let's see what a flying lap looks like now. Able to brake a little bit later. Be so precise now with the apex and exit curbs. That's what you want. Yep, already 1.5 tenths faster through Sector 1. Yep, just able to brake a little bit later because I can see where I am. How about that? There are the apex curbs. There are the exit curbs. Half a second up. Braking a little bit late. We're going to throw it off the road. Of course we do. But there's where the confidence is. I can see now. Now, the only thing I'm wondering about is this too high? Is this unrealistic? I mean, of course it's going to be unrealistic because I'm looking at a single screen with a fixed field of view. Real life, obviously, you can turn your head, but as close of an approximation as we can have. Yep, no longer just wondering vaguely where the side of the track is. Now I can see it, know exactly where I am. Yep, no such problems now. Let's get it stopped here this time. Nice. Very, very nice. 1.25 seconds faster than the previous session best. All because of visibility. All right. I think we found something that works. Again, that is plus 0.4 on the driver height setting there, highlighted on the lower right. Is it realistic? I don't know. All I know is the IR18 remains a very, very good car. A lot of fun to drive. You can definitely feel the ground effect working. No real changes in that regard. It's just a little bit different visually now. Something that's going to take a lot of getting used to. But just like we had with Halo in Formula One and then later in lower series, you figure it out, you divide and conquer and press on. And at some point, and I venture to say some point soon, we're not even going to notice this thing anymore. Of course, externally, the cars look fundamentally different. They're going to be forever changed. From the onboard cameras, particularly from the top of the roll bar, forever changed. I really do think that the T-cam angle from on top of the air snorkels on Formula One cars, that's forever ruined by Halo. Unfortunately, the same is true here with Aeroscreen on IndyCar. You just can't see the front end working anymore. It's a great shame. But at the same time, it's going to be serving a good purpose. And unlike in Formula One, at least in my estimation, IndyCar had an actual pressing need for something like this. And here it is.
Okay, go.
And that's about it. Ultimately, is it an eyesore? Yeah, it absolutely is. It does not at all look good, in my opinion. It's ruined the visual proportions of the IR18 forevermore. However, if it's going to be something that stops Justin Wilson's and Dan Weldon's from happening, yep, all for it. Absolutely all for it. The other problem that IndyCar still has to solve is we got to keep cars on the ground. We got to keep them out of catch fencing. And is that a change that we make on the cars, or is that a change that we make to the racetracks? Well, that remains to be seen. But this is going to fix the Justin Wilson, Dan Weldon problem in terms of what the ultimate results of a bad accident can be. Perhaps the real solution to the problem is trying to figure out why accidents like those happen in the first place. But until that can happen, this seems to be a pretty good interim solution. It's integrated mechanically very well. I believe in terms of driver extrication for the marshals and for the medical team that travels with IndyCar, I believe they can actually get this device entirely removed from the chassis within about a minute. So if they really needed to take their time and get a driver out carefully, they could remove this whole device very quickly. Simple tools, I believe, the only thing necessary to get that off of the car. So there it is. The safety factor is there with it installed, and then the safety factor is maintained in terms of being able to get it away from the driver very quickly if you do need to take your time treating him if he's injured. That's something also that Formula One can't do with their Halo system as it exists right now. It's just bolted in there so much that basically the only people who have the tools necessary to remove it are the teams themselves, which, you know, is a bit of a problem. The other problem that we have with this, and that's something that we've also criticized before in Formula One, is with regard to the danger of fire. We saw in 2018 when Nico Hülkenberg flipped over in Abu Dhabi, car was on fire, he couldn't get out, he knew he couldn't get out. That turned into a bad situation that took about 5 minutes to get him out of a car which was leaking fuel and threatened to catch fire in a bigger way. IndyCar, obviously, if this thing gets inverted, the driver's not getting out. They're going to have to wait for the extraction teams to come in and either cut that Aeroscreen away or to invert the car once again, which could expose the driver to more potential for injury. But again, it's an interim solution, and I think they've done what really they could, given the limited resources and limited time available. They had the testing, which they did, and the results of that were good. The most important part of all, though, they kept the fans informed every step of the way. Compare that and contrast that with what the FIA did with Halo, in that they had 2 or 3 teams test it, 3 or 4 drivers test it, and then they instituted it for everybody, with 70% of the Formula One field never even having seen one before. So read into that what you may. But IndyCar, if we do see it in 2020, is going to be running Aeroscreen on all the cars. It's a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow. We're really seeing the end of open cockpit racing. But again, if any series had an actual pressing need for this, it is IndyCar. They had, unfortunately, really bad accidents, which cost drivers their lives, and they've done something about it in response to it. I leave you with a look at external as well as onboard hot lap replays here, just so you can get a better sense of what this thing actually looks like visually as it's going around from some of the approximated TV angles that you'd be seeing race coverage shown in, so get a sense of what things are going to be looking like. Also, from the onboard cameras, we'll have that roll bar camera mounted on top there of the hoop there, not a snorkel on the IR18, but same place where a Formula One T-cam would be, so you can just get a sense of the overall proportions and sort of, in your mind's eye, compare that to the view that we get on current Formula One cars with Halo. You can see where things are similar, where they're different. I don't know. Which one do you like better? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, though, stay tuned for the Hot Laps. Ferrari Bound 601 saying thank you very much, and of course, we will see you soon.